A school photo from 1910 revealed that the student at desk 5 was already dead. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt something wasn't quite right? Today, we're diving into one of the most chilling photographic mysteries from American history. A 1910 school photo that seemingly captured the impossible. What started as a routine historical documentation project turned into a haunting investigation that would shake a small Massachusetts town to its core. Before we begin, if you enjoy this type of mysterious content, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And speaking of content, I'm also developing another channel focused on historical mysteries. Make sure to check it out if you love these deep dives into the past. The morning mist hung low over Millfield, Massachusetts, as Dr. Sarah Chen made her way up the creaking stairs of the town's Historical Society building. It was October 2023, and the Harvard historian had been commissioned to digitize and catalog a collection of early 20th century photographs donated by the recently deceased estate of Margaret Thornfield, the town's former librarian. Sarah had been working on historical photo preservation for over 15 years, but something about this particular collection gave her an uneasy feeling. Perhaps it was the way the autumn wind rattled the old building's windows, or maybe it was the strange stories the locals had whispered about the Thornfield estate. Margaret had been known as an eccentric woman who rarely spoke about her family's past, living alone in the same Victorian house where she'd been born nearly 90 years earlier. The donated collection contained hundreds of photographs spanning from 1885 to 1925, including family portraits, town events, and school photographs from the now demolished Millfield Elementary School. Sarah had been methodically scanning each image when she came across a particular school photograph that made her pause. The black and white image showed a typical classroom scene from 1910. 24 children sat at wooden desks arranged in neat rows, their faces turned toward the camera with the formal expressions common in early photography. The teacher, Miss Elizabeth Hartford, according to the handwritten note on the back, stood proudly beside her students. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a charming glimpse into America's educational past. But as Sarah examined the photo more closely, using her magnifying equipment, she noticed something peculiar about the boy sitting at desk number 5 in the second row. Unlike the other children who appeared sharp and clear in the photograph, this particular student seemed slightly blurred, as if he had moved during the long exposure time required by cameras of that era. What was more unsettling was his expression. While the other children maintained the serious demeanor typical of formal photographs, this boy appeared to be smiling, almost grinning at the camera. Intrigued by the technical anomaly, Sarah began researching the photograph's background. The back of the image contained a stamp from Patterson's photography studio Est 1895, and the date, September 15, 1910. There was also a list of names written in faded ink, presumably identifying each student in the photograph. According to the list, the boy at desk 5 was Thomas Millbrook, age 10. Sarah decided to cross-reference this information with the school's attendance records, which were housed in the basement archives of the Historical Society. What she discovered in those dusty ledgers would launch one of the most intriguing investigations in the town's history. The Millfield Elementary School attendance records for the 1910-1911 academic year were remarkably well preserved, thanks to the meticulous record-keeping of Principal James Aldrich. Sarah found the class roster for Miss Hartford's 4th grade class, and indeed Thomas Millbrook was listed among the 24 students. However, there was a disturbing notation next to his name: deceased, September 10, 1910, cause influenza. Sarah stared at the record in disbelief. According to the official school documentation, Thomas Millbrook had died 5 days before the photograph was taken. She double-checked the dates multiple times, but there was no mistake. The class photo was dated September 15, 1910, and Thomas's death was recorded as September 10, 1910. If you're finding this mystery as intriguing as I am, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This investigation is just getting started. Determined to solve this puzzle, Sarah spent the remainder of the day searching through additional records. She found Thomas Millbrook's death certificate at the town hall, signed by Dr. William Thornfield, Margaret's grandfather and the town's physician at the time. The certificate confirmed the boy's death from influenza on September 10, 1910, and listed his burial at Millfield Cemetery on September 12th. The more Sarah investigated, the more confused she became. How could a dead child appear in a photograph taken 5 days after his death? She considered several practical explanations. Perhaps the dates were wrong, maybe the photograph had been mislabeled, or there could have been another Thomas Millbrook in the class. However, her research revealed that there was only one Thomas Millbrook living in Millfield at that time, and the dates on all official documents were consistent. As the sun began to set over Millfield, casting long shadows through the Historical Society's windows, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would track down every possible lead, interview elderly residents who might remember stories from that era, and get to the bottom of this impossible mystery. Little did she know that her investigation would uncover a web of secrets that had been buried for over a century, involving not just the mysterious photograph, but the very foundations of the small New England town itself. The photograph lay on the desk before her, and in the dim light of the archive room, Sarah could have sworn that Thomas Millbrook's smile seemed to grow wider, as if he approved of her decision to dig deeper into the truth. Sarah's investigation began in earnest the following morning, when she arrived at Millfield Cemetery, armed with a camera, notebook, and a determination to find answers. The October air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under her feet as she navigated the winding paths between weathered headstones dating back to the town's founding in 1847. After an hour of searching, she found what she was looking for in the children's section of the cemetery, a small, simple headstone bearing the inscription, "Thomas Millbrook, beloved son, 1900-1910, taken too soon by influenza." The grave appeared well-maintained despite its age, with fresh flowers that couldn't have been more than a week old. Sarah photographed the headstone from multiple angles and noted its location before heading to her next destination, the Millfield Public Library. If anyone in town would have information about the historical families and their stories, it would be the current librarian, Mrs. Dorothy Walsh, who had worked there for over 40 years. Mrs. Walsh, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, listened intently as Sarah explained her discovery. "Oh my," she said, adjusting her glasses, "that is quite the mystery. I remember Margaret Thornfield well. She donated those photographs just before she passed. She was always very secretive about her family history, especially anything related to her grandfather, Dr. Thornfield." "What can you tell me about Dr. Thornfield?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notebook. Dr. William Thornfield was the only physician in Millfield from 1895 to 1925. He was well respected, but there were always whispers. Mrs. Walsh paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Some folks said he was too interested in certain types of medical research, if you catch my meaning. This was during the time when photography and medicine were both evolving rapidly, and some doctors were experimenting with unusual techniques." Mrs. Walsh led Sarah to a section of the library dedicated to local history. Among the dusty volumes, they found a book titled Medical Practices in Rural Massachusetts, 1900-1920, by historian Dr. Robert Hayes. The book contained a chapter about Dr. Thornfield that made Sarah's blood run cold. According to Hayes's research, Dr. Thornfield had been fascinated by the new field of post-mortem photography, a common practice in the early 1900s where families would photograph deceased loved ones as a final keepsake, especially children who had died young. The practice was particularly popular during influenza outbreaks when families often lost multiple members quickly and wanted to preserve their memory. But Dr. Thornfield's interest went beyond typical memorial photography. The book referenced several unusual cases where the doctor had experimented with positioning deceased individuals in lifelike poses, sometimes even photographing them alongside living family members before burial. While this practice was not entirely uncommon at the time, Dr. Thornfield's methods were considered somewhat controversial even by the standards of his era. "This is disturbing," Sarah muttered as she read. "But it still doesn't explain how Thomas could appear in a classroom photograph with his living classmates." Mrs. Walsh nodded grimly. "There's more. I remember my grandmother telling stories about that particular school year. The 1910 influenza outbreak hit the town hard, especially the children. Several students in Miss Hartford's class died within a few weeks of each other. My grandmother always said there was something strange about how Dr. Thornfield handled those cases." Sarah's investigation took another turn when Mrs. Walsh mentioned that the Patterson Photography Studio records might still exist. The studio had closed in 1935, but the equipment and some records had been stored in the basement of what was now Murphy's Antique Store on Main Street. Tom Murphy, the store's current owner and great-nephew of the original Patterson photographer, was more than happy to help with Sarah's research. "I've always been curious about those old records myself," he said, leading her down a narrow staircase to the basement. "My great-uncle always said that the 1910s were the strangest years of his career." In the basement, amid dusty furniture and forgotten treasures, they found several boxes of photographic records. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the box labeled 1910-1912. Inside were appointment books, receipts, and most importantly, detailed notes about specific photography sessions. If you're as captivated by this investigation as I am, don't forget to leave a comment about what you think happened. I love hearing your theories. The entry for September 15th, 1910 was more detailed than others. In handwritten notes, the photographer had recorded "Special session, Millfield Elementary, Miss Hartford's class. Unusual circumstances. Dr. Thornfield present to oversee arrangement. Payment received in advance. Note, handle with complete discretion per doctor. Thornfield's instructions." Below this entry was another note that made Sarah's heart race. "Technical difficulties with subject number 5. Multiple exposures required. Dr. Thornfield insists on specific positioning. Final result achieved after considerable effort." Sarah stared at the notes, her mind racing with possibilities. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more disturbing than she had imagined. It appeared that Dr. Thornfield had somehow arranged for Thomas Millbrook to be included in the class photograph after his death, possibly as part of some elaborate post-mortem photography experiment. But the question remained: how had he managed to make a deceased child appear so lifelike in the photograph? And more importantly, why would he go to such lengths to include Thomas in the class picture? As Sarah left Murphy's Antique Store that evening, she realized that her investigation was far from over. She needed to find more information about Dr. Thornfield's experimental practices and, if possible, locate any surviving family members who might shed light on this century-old mystery. The photograph that had started this investigation sat in her bag, and Sarah could feel its presence like a weight on her conscience. Whatever the truth behind Thomas Millbrook's appearance in the 1910 class photo, she was determined to uncover it, no matter how disturbing the reality might prove to be. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching Dr. Thornfield's medical practices at the Massachusetts Medical Society archives in Boston, she encountered Dr. Eleanor Morrison, a retired pathologist who specialized in the history of American medical photography. Dr. Thornfield's work was well documented in certain medical circles, Dr. Morrison explained over coffee in the archive's reading room. He was actually quite progressive for his time, but his methods were questionable by today's standards. You see, in 1910, the line between scientific research and what we might consider ethical violations was much more blurred. Dr. Morrison pulled out a thick folder marked Thornfield William, Medical Photography Research, 1905-1920. Inside were copies of letters, medical journal submissions, and most shocking of all, a series of photographs that made Sarah's stomach churn. The images showed Dr. Thornfield's post-mortem photography work in disturbing detail. Unlike typical memorial photography of the era, which aimed to make the deceased appear peaceful and at rest, Dr. Thornfield's subjects were posed in remarkably lifelike positions. Children sat upright in chairs, adults stood beside mantelpieces, and in several cases, deceased individuals were photographed alongside living family members in group portraits. The technical skill required for these photographs was extraordinary, Dr. Morrison continued. Dr. Thornfield developed his own methods for preserving and positioning bodies to achieve these effects. He used a combination of embalming techniques, mechanical supports, and specialized camera equipment that he designed himself. But the most disturbing revelation came in the form of a letter dated September 20th, 1910, just 5 days after the school photograph was taken. The letter was addressed to a Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann in Vienna, Austria, a pioneer in the field of thanatology, the study of death and dying. In the letter, Dr. Thornfield wrote, "My dear colleague, I am pleased to report complete success with the Millfield Elementary experiment. The subject was prepared using our discussed techniques and photographed alongside living subjects with remarkable results. The family remains unaware of the true circumstances, believing simply that their child was included in the class memorial. The emotional comfort this provides seems to justify our methods." Sarah's hands shook as she read further. The key was timing and preparation. Young Thomas succumbed to influenza on September 10th. I immediately began preservation procedures while arranging with the photographer to delay the class picture by 1 day under the pretense of scheduling conflicts. The embalming process I've developed maintains remarkable flexibility and color for up to 96 hours, allowing for natural positioning. The letter continued with technical details that made Sarah feel nauseous. Dr. Thornfield described how he had used mechanical supports hidden beneath clothing and desk to maintain Thomas's upright posture, how he had applied color to the boy's face to match his living classmates, and how he had even manipulated the corpse's facial muscles to create that unsettling smile that had first caught Sarah's attention. "This is horrifying," Sarah whispered. "He used that dead child as part of some twisted experiment." Dr. Morrison nodded solemnly. By 1910 standards, Dr. Thornfield probably saw this as compassionate. Many families were devastated by sudden child deaths, and the idea of including their lost child in a final class photograph might have seemed like a kindness. But clearly, the methods were deeply problematic. The investigation took another dark turn when Sarah discovered that Thomas Millbrook wasn't Dr. Thornfield's only subject. The archives contained evidence of at least 6 other cases between 1909 and 1912, where the doctor had performed similar post-mortem photography experiments, all involving children who had died from the influenza outbreak. Sarah decided she needed to confront the living connection to this story, someone who might have family knowledge about Dr. Thornfield's practices. Through genealogical research, she discovered that Dr. Thornfield had a surviving great-granddaughter living in nearby Concord, Mrs. Helen Thornfield Barnes, aged 89. Helen lived in an assisted living facility, but her mind was sharp when Sarah visited her on a crisp November afternoon. When Sarah showed her the school photograph and explained her discovery, Helen's reaction was immediate and visceral. "Oh, dear God!" Helen gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "I had hoped these stories were just family legends. My grandfather he was a complicated man who lived in complicated times." Helen revealed that family stories about Dr. Thornfield's special photography services had been passed down through generations, though the details had become increasingly vague over time. My mother always said that grandfather helped families say goodbye to their children in special ways during the influenza years. I never understood what she meant until now. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think about Dr. Thornfield's methods. Were they compassionate or completely unethical? But Helen's most shocking revelation was yet to come. She walked slowly to an old cedar chest in her room and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. "This was my grandfather's personal diary from 1910, she said, handing it to Sarah with trembling hands. "I've never shown it to anyone, but I think it's time the truth came out." The diary entries from September 1910 detailed Dr. Thornfield's internal struggle with his methods. In one entry dated September 12th, he wrote, "Young Thomas's funeral today. His parents thank me for my care during his illness, unaware that he will attend his class photograph in 3 days' time. I tell myself this work provides comfort to grieving families, but I cannot shake the feeling that I am crossing lines that should not be crossed." A later entry from September 16th, the day after the photograph, revealed Dr. Thornfield's growing doubts. "The classroom session was technically successful, but I was disturbed by how natural Thomas appeared among his living classmates. For a moment, even I forgot he was gone. What have I become in my pursuit of preserving memories?" As Sarah read these intimate confessions of a doctor grappling with the ethics of his own actions, she realized that the mystery of the 1910 school photograph was more complex than a simple case of post-mortem photography. It was a window into an era when the boundaries between science, compassion, and exploitation were dangerously blurred, and where one man's attempt to ease suffering had created a legacy of disturbing questions that would haunt his family for generations. Armed with Dr. Thornfield's diary and the growing evidence of his post-mortem photography practices, Sarah knew she needed to find descendants of the Millbrook family. The ethical implications of her discovery weighed heavily on her mind. Should this century-old secret remain buried, or did the families involved deserve to know the truth? Her search led her to James Millbrook, Thomas's great-nephew, who lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. James, a 67-year-old retired teacher, was initially skeptical when Sarah contacted him by phone, but his interest was piqued when she mentioned the 1910 school photograph. "I have a copy of that photograph," James said during their phone conversation. "It's been hanging in our family home for decades. My great-grandfather always treasured it because it was the last picture ever taken of Thomas. We were told he died just a few days after it was taken." When Sarah met James at his home the following weekend, she brought copies of all her research, including Dr. Thornfield's diary entries. James studied the materials with growing disbelief and horror. "You're telling me that my great-great-uncle was dead when this photograph was taken?" James stared at the familiar image that had hung in his childhood home. "That Dr. Thornfield? He used Thomas's body like some kind of prop?" Sarah nodded grimly. "According to all the evidence I've found, yes. Dr. Thornfield appears to have positioned Thomas's body at desk 5 and photographed him alongside his living classmates as what he believed was a compassionate gesture for your family." James was quiet for several minutes, processing this revelation. Finally, he spoke. "This explains some things that never made sense to me. My grandfather always said there was something strange about that photograph, something about the way Thomas looked different from the other children. And there were always whispers about Dr. Thornfield being unusual." James shared family stories that had been passed down through generations, stories about Dr. Thornfield offering special services to families who lost children during the influenza outbreak, about how the doctor always seemed to be present at funerals and memorial services, and about how he charged unusually high fees for his commemorative photography work. "But the strangest thing," James continued, "was how Thomas's parents reacted to the photograph. My grandfather said his grandparents were both comforted and disturbed by it. They treasured it as a final memory of Thomas, but his mother apparently couldn't look at it without crying, and she always said Thomas looked different in that picture. Sarah's investigation expanded as she tracked down descendants of other families affected by Dr. Thornfield's practices. Through cemetery records and genealogical databases, she identified 5 other children who had died during the 1909-1912 influenza outbreaks, and whose families had commissioned memorial photographs from the Patterson studio with Dr. Thornfield's involvement. Her conversations with these families revealed a disturbing pattern. In each case, the families had been told their child would be included in a special memorial photograph to help preserve their memory. The parents, devastated by grief and willing to pay any price for one last image of their lost children, had agreed to Dr. Thornfield's services without understanding the full scope of what he was doing. Margaret Sullivan, great-granddaughter of another affected family, showed Sarah a photograph from 1911 that depicted her deceased great-great-aunt Mary, sitting at a family dinner table alongside living relatives. "We always thought it was taken just before Mary died," Margaret explained. "But now I'm wondering if your research suggests otherwise." Sarah's heart sank as she examined the photograph. Using the same analytical techniques she had applied to the school photograph, she could see the telltale signs of Dr. Thornfield's work. The slightly unnatural positioning, the mechanical supports hidden beneath clothing, and the uncanny valley effect of a face that appeared alive but somehow wrong. Through her research, Sarah discovered that Dr. Thornfield's practices had not gone entirely unnoticed during his lifetime. She found records of a complaint filed with the Massachusetts Medical Board in 1913 by Dr. Charles Whitmore, a Boston physician who had heard rumors about Thornfield's unconventional memorial services. The complaint stated, "I have reason to believe that Dr. William Thornfield of Millfield is engaging in practices that violate the dignity of the deceased and exploit grieving families. Reports suggest he is photographing corpses in lifelike poses and charging exorbitant fees for these services while misleading families about the nature of his work." However, the investigation was apparently dropped when the 1918 influenza pandemic struck, overwhelming medical authorities with more pressing concerns. Dr. Thornfield continued his practices until 1920, when he suddenly stopped accepting photography commissions and focused solely on traditional medical practice. If you've been following this investigation, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Sarah's most significant discovery came when she found Dr. Thornfield's final diary entry related to his photography work, dated December 31st, 1920. "I can no longer continue this work. The weight of what I have done in the name of comfort and science has become unbearable. I see the faces of those children in my dreams, and I am haunted by the knowledge that I have violated the natural order of death and remembrance. I pray that future generations will forgive my transgressions, for I cannot forgive myself," the entry continued. "I have decided to destroy all remaining photographs and cease these practices immediately. The families deserve to remember their children as they lived, not as I have manipulated them in death. May God have mercy on my soul for what I have done in the name of medical progress." This revelation suggested that Dr. Thornfield eventually recognized the ethical problems with his work and attempted to cover his tracks by destroying evidence. However, the photographs that survived in family collections continued to preserve the dark secret of his unconventional practices. As Sarah compiled her findings, she faced a difficult decision. Should she publish her research and expose Dr. Thornfield's century-old deception, potentially causing pain to descendant families who had treasured these photographs as genuine final memories of their loved ones? Or should some secrets remain buried with the past? The weight of her discovery kept Sarah awake for several nights as she grappled with the ethical implications of her research. She had uncovered a dark chapter in medical history, but exposing it would shatter the cherished memories of several families who had treasured what they believed were final photographs of their loved ones. Her decision came during a conversation with Dr. Morrison, the retired pathologist who had helped her understand Dr. Thornfield's methods. "The truth," Dr. Morrison said, "is rarely as simple as we want it to be. Dr. Thornfield wasn't a monster. He was a man operating in a different era with different ethical standards, trying to help families cope with devastating losses. But that doesn't make his methods acceptable." Sarah decided to approach each affected family individually, giving them the choice of whether to make the information public. To her surprise, most of the descendants wanted the truth to be told, feeling that their ancestors deserved honesty even a century later. James Milbrook was the most vocal advocate for disclosure. "If we hide this," he told Sarah, "we're just perpetuating the deception that Dr. Thornfield started. Thomas and the other children deserve to have their stories told truthfully, not as part of some elaborate lie." Sarah's final breakthrough came when she discovered a hidden compartment in Dr. Thornfield's medical desk, which had been donated to the Millfield Historical Society after his death in 1943. Inside the compartment were detailed photographs documenting his entire post-mortem photography process, along with a letter addressed to whoever discovers this truth. In the letter, dated 1925, Dr. Thornfield wrote, "I know that someday someone will uncover what I have done. I leave this record not as a justification for my actions, but as a complete confession of my methods and motivations. I began this work believing I was providing comfort to grieving families during one of the most devastating health crises in our town's history." The letter continued, "The influenza outbreak of 1909-1912 claimed 37 children in Millfield. Parents were desperate for any connection to their lost children, and I thought my skills could provide them with precious final memories. I never told the families the truth about when these photographs were taken, because I believed the comfort they derived from them was more important than the technical details." Dr. Thornfield's confession revealed the full scope of his deception. He had developed an elaborate system of delayed funeral services, secret body preparation, and coordinated photography sessions that allowed him to create what appeared to be final living photographs of deceased children. The families paid premium prices for these rush photography sessions, unaware that their children were already dead. "I realize now," the letter concluded, "that I robbed these families of the natural grieving process and replaced genuine memories with fabricated ones. I exploited their love and desperation for my own sense of scientific achievement. History will judge me harshly, and rightfully so." Sarah's investigation also revealed the broader impact of Dr. Thornfield's work on the community. Several elderly Millfield residents, when interviewed, recalled strange stories from their grandparents about funerals that seemed rushed during the influenza years, about families receiving mysterious photography bills, and about children's bodies that seemed to disappear and reappear around funeral services. Mrs. Dorothy Walsh at the library provided the final piece of the puzzle when she remembered a conversation with Margaret Thornfield shortly before her death. "Margaret told me that her family had been haunted by her grandfather's work for generations. She said the family had tried to destroy all evidence of his photography experiments, but some photographs had survived in other families' collections. This explained why Margaret had donated the historical photographs to the society. It was her final attempt to let the truth come to light while distancing her family from the revelation." Sarah's research culminated in a comprehensive report that she presented to the Millfield Town Council in December 2023. The report detailed Dr. Thornfield's post-mortem photography practices identified all known affected families and provided recommendations for how the town should address this historical revelation. The council voted to create a memorial garden at Millfield Cemetery, honoring all children lost during the 1909-1912 influenza outbreak, with plaques acknowledging both their lives and the complex circumstances surrounding their memorial photographs. They also established a scholarship fund in memory of Thomas Millbrook and the other affected children. If you enjoyed this investigation into historical mysteries, please leave a comment below. I love hearing from viewers and would especially love to know where you're listening from. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah's work led to changes in how historical photographs are analyzed and authenticated. Her techniques for identifying post-mortem photography are now used by historians and archivists worldwide to better understand the true stories behind historical images. The 1910 school photograph of Miss Hartford's class now hangs in the Millfield Historical Society with a placard explaining its true history. Visitors can see the original image alongside Dr. Thornfield's documentation, providing a complete picture of both the medical practices of the early 1900s and the lengths to which grieving families would go to preserve memories of their lost children. James Millbrook, speaking at the Memorial Garden dedication, perhaps summarized the situation best. Thomas and the other children deserve to be remembered for who they were in life, not as subjects in Dr. Thornfield's experiments. But their stories also remind us that grief makes people vulnerable, and those in positions of trust must be held to the highest ethical standards, regardless of the era they live in. The mystery of the boy from Desk 5 who was already dead had been solved, but it revealed a far more complex story about medicine, ethics, grief, and the dangerous intersection of scientific advancement and human vulnerability in early 20th century America. This investigation into the 1910 school photograph revealed one of the most disturbing medical practices in American history, hidden for over a century in plain sight. Dr. Thornfield's post-mortem photography experiments represent a dark chapter where good intentions led to deeply unethical practices that exploited grieving families during their most vulnerable moments. If you found this story fascinating, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Dr. Thornfield's actions and whether you think his methods were misguided compassion or unethical exploitation. Also, let me know where you're listening from. I enjoy connecting with viewers from around the world who share a passion for historical mysteries. What was your favorite part of this investigation? The initial discovery, the family revelations, or perhaps the final confession letter? Leave your thoughts in the comments and let's discuss this incredible case. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future investigations into historical mysteries, unexplained photographs, and the hidden stories behind seemingly ordinary objects from our past. Thanks for joining me on this journey into one of history's most disturbing photographic mysteries. Until next time, keep questioning what you see. Sometimes the most innocent images hide the darkest secrets.